Alright, well, we're on. Alright, once upon a time there were 6 people: Matt O'Jones, Richard O'Sullivan, Benny Johnson, Alexander McLaughlin, Stephen Stevens, Al Robertson and Dan O'Roberts went to Matlock when it all went wrong for not the right reasons. One of them started vomiting and this would go on for 2 hours. The next day the person who started vomiting went to the doctors. They learned that they'd got a virus. It would be uncertain if this virus would get passed on. Late that evening they all played some golf at the golf club at Burley. And then after they played golf they went to the houses. The next day there was a dangerous individual. Come back, there was a dangerous individual once again, Damien Ritchie. Damien Ritchie, who was on the run, he quit his job fixing computers. The next day they received a phone call on their phone. Damien Ritchie plotted to find Matt O'Jones, Richard O'Sullivan, Benny Johnson, Alexander McLaughlin, Stephen Stevens, Al Robertson, Dan O'Roberts. Right, Damien Ritchie planned to go to their house. He wanted gold, but they were trying to defend off Damien Ritchie. However, Damien Ritchie was not in the mood to muck around. Damien Ritchie was not in the mood to muck around. Damien Ritchie went off with £234,589. He must be caught surely. If someone has any information, they must get in contact with the police. Damien Ritchie is a very dangerous individual. The next day, the 6 students, they went on a train journey to Aberdeen. However, what they weren't to know was there was some dangerous individuals: Carl Wilkinson, Damien Ritchie, Jerome Robert, Andrew McMahon, Brett O'Driscoll, Willow Matthews. These men were being very dangerous. They needed to be put behind bars. Before it was too late, something had to be done about this. The next day they went to play some darts at Riley's. But what they weren't to know was that Riley's was not open, so they went for a nice walk in Derbyshire. They decided they would have their lunch at Grindleford Cafe. It would remain to be seen if they would receive a phone call from the men. Time would tell whether they would get the phone call from the suspects who were on the lookout for them. The next day the police arrested the suspects and put them behind bars in prison. They will be handed 200 years in prison. The next day Damien Ritchie broke out of prison, but only for Damien Ritchie to get wrestled down to the floor. The next day Damien Ritchie made his escape out of prison. Damien Ritchie boarded a ferry to Rotterdam, but Damien Ritchie was refused entry because he didn't have a passport on him, so Damien Ritchie barged past and gained entry into Rotterdam. However, it wasn't finished yet, but because Damien Ritchie, he was on the move again, he boarded a plane to Milan. Damien Ritchie's parents tried to get in touch with Damien Ritchie, but Damien Ritchie wouldn't answer the calls. So answer the phone calls. The next day, the 6 of them, they went out to the shop when a gang of youths tried to start on them. However, they tried to push them away. But the youths, who were named Federico Sampoli, Alex Richards and Mark O'Neill, they started on them for no reason. These youths have real behaviour problems, and they should be locked up in their cells. The next day they cooked a stew, but it would not go right. It wouldn't go right. The smoke alarm would go off, and there would be a fire. However, they jumped out of the window, and luckily enough, they were okay. They called the fire brigade, and in 5 seconds, the fire brigade arrived and put out the fire. This would be remarkable. Luckily enough, the stew would be okay, and they would have fish stew for their tea and with lettuce and pepper, and then for their dessert they would have a chocolate brownie. The next day they went to Meadowhall to buy some shopping, and yet again Damien Ritchie appeared out of nowhere. Damien Ritchie went into Sports World and he threatened staff. He told them to put their hands up and to put their heads on their hands. And the staff at Sports World raised the alarm, and the manager Sean O'Keefe didn't know what was going on. Damien Ritchie would be rearrested, but what would happen now would be absolutely extraordinary. Damien Ritchie would jump out of the police car, and Damien Ritchie, he would head toward Paris. However, the police quickly found him, and Damien Ritchie would spend 780 years in prison. The next day, they got an interview at Old Bar 1. Brad Scott would interview them to see if they were suitable to work for Brad Scott. Later that evening, Brad Scott made his decision. Brad Scott offered them the job. The next day they arrived for their first shift at Old Bar 1. They were working until early hours. When they saw a fight happening in the middle of the bar, they alerted Brad Scott, and Brad Scott would call the security, and the security would break up the fight. However, the security would get attacked, and this would turn out to be disgusting. That the police arrived onto the scene. They would speak to Brad Scott, and the 6 of them, as to what their version of events were. They told the police they saw two guys aged Anthony Jones and Oliver McMahon. The police arrested the three men, but they abused the police, calling them all sorts. It was handbags. It was handbags. What were these people doing? They should know better. They were behaving like animals. The next day, the police arrested the two people, Anthony Jones and Oliver McMahon, where they would go to court and would learn their fate. Judge Sam Jenkinson would hand Anthony Jones and Oliver McMahon a 25-year sentence for the fight in World War I in the early hours of Monday morning. Yeah, Judge Sam Jenkinson made the correct decision. The next day, Judge Sam Jenkinson handed Dame Ritchie 8 years in prison, and Dame Ritchie would get house arrest and would get a further 40 years for breaking out of prison. The other dangerous suspects, they did not escape prison. They would serve their time in prison. Later that evening, they celebrated the verdict. Judge Sam Jenkinson spoke to the media. He told the media he gave Dame Ritchie 58 years in prison, followed by a further 8 years, 105 years, because of the way Dame Ritchie was behaving in court. Dame Ritchie did not win the decision, and the decision stood. The end of Sam Jenkinson. Yeah, done.
Well done.
And that was myself who was a judge. That was myself.
Yeah, I heard you described yourself as a judge.
That was me.